magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Where you gonna be tonight? Oh, there's magic coming. There's magic coming. There's magic coming. Get ready for the rest of your life.
Hello, Sassafriends. Welcome to SassafrasCast, a podcast full of witchy insights to help you lead your sassiest life. You may have noticed that this podcast is coming out a little later in the month than is typical for me. I had to reschedule my recording of this episode for 2 weeks after I originally planned to due to some health stuff. And I really just want to give a loving and grateful shout out to all of my patrons because I made the announcement in our patron Discord and I was flooded with people saying like, please take care of yourself. That's the most important thing. Like your health comes first. We can wait for the podcast. Just, like let us know how you're doing. And I just want to share my extreme gratitude that is the kind of community that has built up around SassafrasCast. It really means the world to me. All of the compassion and kindness that I have received. Hello, friends. Hello, Grayson. So if you are listening to this podcast, you should know that patrons get to tune in for the live studio recording of SassafrasCast on a private, I should say unlisted, YouTube live link once a month. And then it ultimately gets out to wherever you're listening to it now, be it, Apple Podcast or Spotify or some other place. So if you are interested in being a part of that, you can become a patron, which you can do at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot for $1 a month or more. In addition to getting in on these private YouTube links so that patrons can tune in for the live recording, hang out in the chat, and ask and answered questions in real time, they also get access to a really spiffy Discord server where we talk about all things witchy and wonderful and share memes and bring up really interesting questions. Like every so often someone brings something to the server that I'm like, ooh. So let me first give a shout out to all my patrons and then get going with this episode. I'm very excited about it. So here we go. Thank you to Amanda Little, Patty Bell from SoulShepherd.love, Rachel Miller, Anti-Fragile Tarot, Grayson, Savannah Tillett, B from Whimsical Solace, Millie Orozco, Ruby, Rebecca Jones, Brittany, Hannah Westlock, and Brittany Campbell. I am so grateful that you are in my world. Today, as I broadcast this, though not as you're listening to it, is a holiday here in the States. This is Memorial Day, and usually, as you know, I record on a Saturday or a Sunday to make it like very accessible to people, and I kind of was hoping that 11 a.m. on Memorial Day would be a time that was equally accessible to a lot of people. I realize that I have an international audience, so maybe not so for everybody. But I believe it is also Remembrance Day in a lot of places. And I also hope that that's not super inappropriate for me to be using as an opportunity to broadcast my podcast. But I hope that accidentally rhymed more than I thought it would. I hope this is coming to you wherever you're listening to it and however you're listening to it at the right moment for it to give you some insight and give you some useful things to think about. I want to jump into the topic of the day, but first it's time for me to bump my microphone and make a noise. After that, it's time for the Witchy Weather Report. You may have tuned in a couple days ago. I now have the Witchy Weather Report as a standalone podcast every month, in which I kind of share a little bit about the witchy weather of the moment, what is going on spiritually. I pull a card for everyone, and then continue to pull cards for anyone who would like one up to an hour. And patrons, as always, get to skip the line, but I open this up to everyone. Anyone who shows up can get a card as long as I have time within the hour. This Witchy Weather Report that I do on the podcast, on the official SassafrasCast, is really just meant to be a brief comment on what is going on, perhaps astrologically, or any kind of spiritual weather that I feel is worth commenting on. And again, I will pull a card for everyone to reflect on. So as I am recording this, it is a dark moon. We're in a new moon. It is the new moon in May of 2022, but it's also the end of the month, so it's about to be June. And we also had an eclipse 2 weeks ago, a full moon eclipse. And eclipses tend to bring about epiphanies. And I bring this up, it's funny because I had originally intended to record this podcast 2 weeks ago, and that was not in the cards for me. And so I had, the only thing I had done in terms of writing the episode when I opened up the document was like this lengthy treatise on eclipses and how they bring about epiphanies. And now that information is like 2 weeks old. Do we still care? I'm here to say that at a new moon, we actually do still care. I want to ask you to reflect on whether you've had any epiphanies in the last couple weeks, because often new moons, full moon eclipses, I'm mixing up my words. Often full moon eclipses do bring about some real clarity in the kind of kick you in the face kind of way. In the way of like, oh wow, I just realized that this isn't going to work anymore. Or I just realized I need to pursue this. Or I just realized that this thing in my life needs a lot more attention or a lot less attention than I am giving it. And those realizations are actionable, but not in the instant. In the instant, they feel cathartic. In the instant, it's like, wow, this is really important. And then it is up to us to shore up that important realization that we had, that's meaningful if we had it, especially if it felt very emotional, with our practical actions. And so today, as we are going into a new moon, and a new cycle, I'm going to ask you what kind of epiphanies you may have had in the last 2 weeks, what kind of realizations you may have had about your life, and if there are ways we can set some intentions around them. And I don't want to make this into a homework assignment where like it's like, okay, kids, turn in your science projects, but I do want to make it into something where we ask ourselves, okay, I had that realization about what needed to change in some way, and how can I bring that change into my life in a way that's healthy for me, right? So if the realization, for example, is that we're so busy and overwhelmed that we don't have time for anything, then probably trying to actualize that realization through like a lengthy multi-day ritual that requires a huge time commitment is not going to be the most practical way for us to do it. I'm definitely not calling my own self out here on things I literally may have done in the last few months. Rather, let's choose a way to integrate this newfound understanding of ourselves in a way that we can address in our practical day-to-day lives in the coming cycle, and see if we can get some positive growth out of that. Let me now pull a card for everyone. I'm reading today with the Wildwood Tarot, which is the same deck that I read with at the Witchy Weather Report a couple of days ago. And this is a kind of UK foresty deck. That's the way I want to put it. It really centers back on English lore around the forest and the spirituality of the forest. And I find there are a lot of lessons for me as I go through this that are both seemingly very practical on the surface and some that are seeming very esoteric on the surface. And it kind of goes both ways, which I feel meshes well with the concept of this show, which I'll get into in a little bit. But here's our card for right now. This is really interesting because this is the same card I picked for the Witchy Weather Report yesterday. It is the King of Arrows, the Kingfisher. Let's talk about the Kingfisher. The King of Arrows. Arrows are analogous in this deck to the element of air. The king holds dominion over this element, which doesn't mean he controls it. It rather means he rules with it as a wise influencer. And when we talk about air, we're talking about wisdom. We are talking about utilizing our knowledge and understanding of the world around us to make wise and informed decisions. This is an interesting juxtaposition again with the topic of the day, because the topic of the day is about specifically ritual and spell work, and more specifically, finding ways to approach ritual and spell work that are going to be meaningful for you specifically, kind of choosing your own adventure in a wise and intelligent way based on you and your individual needs, rather than kind of hoping that a prescribed adventure is going to cut it for you. Although choosing your own adventure may include delving into a prescribed path, delving into a well-trodden path that others have walked before. It may or may not. But this is interesting because the King of Arrows uses both information, evidence-based information, facts, as well as self-knowledge to steer his course. And the kingfisher in particular puts this in a very practical light, right? The kingfisher is a bird. In the card, we see the kingfisher like really poised, ready to strike, ready to dive into a pond or a lake or a river and get his breakfast. And the kingfisher is able to do this with incredible precision and agility in a way that seems instinctual and is actually born out of practice and learning and years of experience. And I want to talk about this in particular because I think in the magical community, much as in the creative community, we have this kind of false idea that either you're born with a special gift or you have to work very hard. And the truth is, as with anything, right, there are areas where we may have more or less of a natural aptitude, but at the end of the day, in our adulthood, as we move through our lives, what determines our path and what determines our success has so much more to do with us and our focus and where we choose to put our effort and energy into. And I think about, in particular, people who do not have a musical aptitude. I'm a musician, so I kind of relate it back to this. I have had students who had zero aptitude. I'm not currently teaching, but I have taught people on and off over the years, and have expressed to me that they had to work hard for every note and thus valued every note an incredible amount, who then ultimately became better musicians than people who had a natural aptitude and phoned it in, didn't feel like they had to put in the work to really develop their musicianship. And I believe the same is true in ritual and magic, in our spirituality, and things like divination, and things like when we talk about people being psychic or people receiving messages or people being quote unquote good manifestors. Yeah, I think we can have a natural aptitude, and I think we also put way too much emphasis on it. When I show up as a tarot reader and people ask me, how did you know you have the gift? I want to say, like, let's back up. Because the truth is that this is something that interests me and excites me, and I've put a great deal of study into it. And whether or not you walk away from this experience feeling like I have a gift, I don't know that that gift came from, some magical, mystical handing down of talent to me, or whether it just came through earnest effort, or a combination of both. But what's important to me is that I did put in the effort, and I've developed myself into being a much more capable tarot reader than I was when I first started, whether I had a natural gift or not. And that's what the King of Arrows is all about. The King of Arrows is not interested in having a mystical talent experience where things just fall into place. The King of Arrows is interested in looking at facts and looking at how things are currently playing out and looking at the strengths and weaknesses of himself and the situation and strategizing to work with those things to best advantage to reach his goals. And so that is our focus for the coming moon cycle. How can we look at what's around us as well as look at ourselves and strategize to have those things work to our advantage? It's that added insight and wisdom, tying it all together into like an actionable plan. Now that brings us really nicely into the topic of the day. So the topic of the day loosely is ritual and spellwork. I've decided to name this episode Choosing Your Own Magical Adventure because that's kind of the direction it ended up taking. But the topic originally came out of a question asked by a patron and an excellent human, Grayson. So I'm going to share this verbatim from the Discord server where it was asked because they put it in an exquisite way. Following spellbooks versus making it up yourself. As an eclectic, how do you figure out what works for you personally? I brought it up because lots of people in the occult community say you have to pick one system and stick with it long enough to get good at it. Otherwise, you will never see results. And other people are like, I hugged a tree and I did the chicken dance and I won $1 million or whatever. I would enjoy hearing your take on it. I tend to use a lot of Crowley and traditional ceremonial magic myself, but I still think of myself as a chaos mage at heart. I love all of that, and I also love the acknowledgement of like the blending of influences, as well as still feeling like there's this core belief system or core, kind of pull and magical identity at heart. Because I know to call chaos magic a belief system is its own can of worms, but I do opine that it is a belief system, and it's one that I kind of resonate with. So I'm going to take this already complex topic and expand on it, because that's what I do in this podcast. I also think that there's a 101 side to this question, which manifests itself for people first getting into the occult or first getting into witchcraft or a pagan-y spirituality as, oh my gosh, like, how do I get started? There are so many things I could be doing, and I don't know what to do. The internet is really full of prescriptive advice around ritual and spellcraft. Well, and everything, I guess. If you join a forum of any kind about magic, especially a general one, you get to hear people say absolutely wild and conflicting stuff with complete conviction. The belief systems that people have around magic are vastly different. So even if you are someone who believes you have to follow the one true path to the answer, you're still forced to choose your own adventure and essentially define that one true path for yourself. You may end up choosing a well-trodden path. You may end up choosing to walk a path that others have walked before, that has a framework, and that might feel right to you. But ultimately, very few people are kind of born into magic. And we see a lot of memes, actually, about people who are like, I'm an intergenerational witch, and how that can be... I don't know, like a weird point of pride of like, I'm a multi-generational witch and it's been handed down in my family, and there's nothing wrong with that. But most of us come to magic and come to this type of belief system kind of on our own, because other stuff that we were handed as we were growing up wasn't quite doing it, and we needed to define our own belief system in a healthy way. So even if you end up feeling, yes, this is the path I've found and now I'm going to follow it, you still, along the way, you have to kind of sniff out what feels like the truth to you. Even if your personality is not the type to want to approach research in that way, in that kind of intuitive, I don't know, let's figure it out kind of way. Now, if you've listened to me for any length of time, I think you know that I work with beliefs in a functional, this is useful to me kind of way, rather than a, this is an absolute truth kind of way. Especially in occult and spiritual matters, it is difficult to determine the absolute truth of anything, because our experiences are both internal and deeply personal. If you have ever woken from a dream that dramatically affected you and made you feel things very deeply, and then when you woke up, you tried to describe it to a friend and kind of like discussed what happened in the dream and found that your explanation really fell short, and they kind of were like, huh, okay. Then like you have experienced this conflict, this difficulty in conveying the big, deep internal experience that occult exploration and spirituality are. And I'm using a variety of words to determine this because I think my audience has a variety of practitioners, has people who are more on the Wiccan pagan side, people who are more on the chaos magic side, and people who are more on the, this is all really interesting to me psychologically, and I don't necessarily believe there's something mystical behind it side. And I want to make room for all of those beliefs, especially because I've kind of had all of them and still do, in one way or another. I'm someone who is open to the concept that this is difficult stuff to get a handle on, and that there are multiple truths that have different things to teach us. Anyway, all of this is fine. The fact that there are many answers is fine with me personally, because spirituality and occult exploration works to serve different needs for different people at different times in our lives. So we need a wide menu. We need a good magical menu of what we can turn to. In the same way that religions, mainstream religions, have a big menu of both like how you relate to your religion, whether you relate in a very kind of fundamentalist, rigid sort of way, or a more like laissez-faire, I have a personal relationship with my religion kind of way, as well as touch on a wide variety of life topics, because they need to be there for us through every experience we have in our lives. So I'm going to take a somewhat agnostic view here throughout this episode and recommend that you follow the type of path and the type of practice that works for you and helps you thrive and grow, whether that be something that is kind of laissez-faire and kind of like, well, I do what I feel and, it's intuitive for me, or whether that is something that is deeply regimented ceremony and has a specific path and set of steps for you to follow. Whatever helps you thrive and grow in your practice is the thing I encourage you to do, whether it is that or, doing a chicken dance and hugging a tree. And maybe both things over the course of your life, maybe both things over the course of a week, because why not? Like, there's no rules. You may be following a path with rules, and I don't want to disrespect them or encourage you to if they're meaningful to you, but there's no rules in our exploration of spirituality and meaning and creating the lives we want to create, which I think is ultimately what ritual and magic is about. But that's also, I'm going to acknowledge, a cop-out answer. By the way, I'm going to say here, I know I have at least one patron tuned in, maybe others who are not coming into the chat. Feel free, if you've got either experiences you wish to share or questions and commentary you want to add on this topic, I would love for you to do that in this episode in particular, to share in the chat if you feel comfortable about it being integrated into the episode, because I think that a variety of voices and a variety of options and ideas around this topic is absolutely needed for us to be able to have a meaningful magical experience as individuals. So in essence, what I've done, Grayson, is take your question about like, which do you do, and be like, all of the things and none of them and whatever works for you, and give you a complete non-answer for probably a good hour-long episode. So let's talk about how that answer is a cop-out. The thing that we have in common as people turning to ritual and spell work is that we are seekers. We're in pursuit of truth. We're in pursuit of something meaningful to us. And that varies dramatically from person to person. For many people, magic is a pragmatic means to an end. I want magic to change specific things in my life in ways I can describe, like having more money or finding a wonderful romantic partner. Also, many people seek out magic for the simple sake of exploring and learning more about life's meaning and mystery. And also, for many people, magic is a deeply personal practice where it's about becoming the person I was meant to be, discovering my life's purpose, or fulfilling my destiny. I don't think these various goals are mutually exclusive. I think for many of us, there's an overlap, and all of these things are important, probably more or less at different times in our lives. But what's most important to us is going to help us figure out what practices are going to help us. What is our goal at this instant in time? I'm really in favor of us taking regular inventories rather than doing a one and done like, yep, this is it. This is my path. Because ideally we're growing and evolving as human beings. I'm going to get into that more in the Which You Got This segment, where I'm going to kind of give you a list of questions to either journal about or just reflect on and ask yourself to help you understand like what you need from your magical practice at this moment. But I'm going to say that it's correct, in my opinion, for us to need a variety of things over the course of our lives. It's correct that sometimes we're going to have a practice that's deeply meaningful to us, and 5-10 years down the line, we're going to look back at it and be like, next. Like, that's like, it's so irrelevant to my life right now. And that doesn't mean we were wrong before and are right now. And it doesn't mean we were right before and are wrong now. It just means we're evolving, because people evolve. That's a good thing. Am I the annoying person on the sidelines going, guys, you're both right? I think yes. I view spiritual seeking as a very individualized path, and I am not the person to steer you away from your own sense of truth and towards mine, especially because mine is always evolving. But one thing I will recommend to you is to step lightly around belief if you possibly can. For me personally, treating beliefs and practices as interesting experiments has been a more helpful attitude than treating them as something that needs to be set in stone and that I can either pass or fail. And speaking of passing and failing, I'm going to take us back to science class in like elementary school. You may have been focused, if you were doing like a science lab, on doing each step right enough to get a good grade. Not to like become, Einstein and have like amazing scientific insights, but to get the grade that you need to get so you could pass the class. But hopefully you also took away the point of doing an active lab being to learn and evolve our understanding, to understand the world around us better so that we can interact with it better or simply to understand it better. Attempting to duplicate someone else's work with precision, as we might do in a lab experiment in school, may indeed lead you to greater personal understanding on your way to becoming an experienced scientist. I would liken this to doing ceremonial magic that is very prescriptive, right? Like, here's the spell, here's what you do, here's how long you meditate, here's how many times you do the chant, here's what you wear, here's the thing you shouldn't eat beforehand because it might offend a certain spirit. Like, a very specified set of instructions that may teach us a great deal whether or not we do the spell quote unquote right. That might lead us to a greater understanding as a magical practitioner and may be the right thing for you to do at this moment in your journey. Science is a study aimed at getting to the truth for both practical purposes and for the sake of expanding our understanding. Yet, even science teachers know that intellectually understanding that certain chemicals produce volatile reactions is not as impactful to our individual understanding as making a pretend volcano out of baking soda and vinegar. Sometimes you just got to see the baking soda and vinegar and be like, that's a volatile reaction right there. Look at that. You take away from it and it impresses more upon you for you to then use that knowledge more effectively in the future. Also in science class, I remember learning about applied science versus pure science, i.e., science for the pursuit of improving our lives in practical ways, like building a car or inventing air conditioning, versus science for the simple pursuit of knowledge and broader understanding. And calling the latter pure is a little bit of a moral judgment call. And we see the same moral judgment call play out in magical communities pretty constantly, where people are either talking about sacred versus profane magic in very explicit terms, or they're speaking in kind of highfalutin language that is less specific but still implies that, like, oh, well, if you're using your magic to work on your finances, then you're not really a spiritual person, for example. In some circles, you are looked at as the ultimate goofball if the main reason you want to do magic is to have $20 in your pocket and food on the table. And at the same time, like, privilege ahoy! If you are able to focus purely on the sacred matter of becoming deeply spiritual and engaging deeply with your path, then chances are it's because your profane needs, silly little things like having enough to eat and having a roof over your head, have already been taken care of. Priorities get real simple when you're not sure when your next meal is coming from. And rather than that making you profane, that's an appropriate survival response. I know that we have to have these terms. I know that there are followers of these paths who are like, yeah, I'm not, dismissing things by calling it profane versus sacred, just as my science teacher said to me, we're not saying that applied science is less valuable than pure science, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. There's a value call in the language. It's right there. And humans respond to language on a subconscious level, even if we're like, no, that's not what we mean. We are responding to the language. And I think it really comes through in the way we talk about what is and isn't high magic or low magic. So now that I've rambled about this stuff a little bit, I want to talk about how to make it practical, how to practically seek out the magical path or experience that works for you in this moment in time. But first, I am going to set a couple of ground rules that are helpful to me, and as always, you can take them or leave them. 1, you don't need to have one continuous clear path. In fact, if your path looks incredibly cut and dry and you just kind of progress along a straight line, in my view, that is a sign of spiritual bypassing and it not being that deeply experienced of a path for you. It is more like taking the science lab just to get the grade, passing the test, understanding how the volcano works, and moving on with your life than getting like a deep understanding that a spiritual path or an occult path is frankly supposed to do for you. Even people who are deeply committed to a very regimented ceremonial magic path will acknowledge that a part of why it is so deeply meaningful for them is that returning to these practices regularly with discipline and learning through their own challenges and resistance to these specific sacred tasks teaches them a lot that's off book, A lot of learning happens internally. A lot of learning kind of can't be experienced until you've gone through it. 2, let's throw out the idea of grading our ritual and spell work. That can lead us to an ineffectiveness party. We can do the same ritual 50 times and find minute imperfections to improve on in our Gnostic state when we bless the sacred goblet, or, if we lost count when we chanted the chant 12 times, or what we were wearing, or if our mind was wandering, and whether or not, therefore, the ritual counts. And then we lose focus on the result. Whether the result is a practical result, like getting $20 in our pockets, or whether the result is ultimately improving our spiritual understanding of the universe or something big and grand like that, when we get lost in the minutia in that way, we lose the result. So let's honor that ritual and spell work as a practical experimentation. Let's embrace the idea of being perfectly imperfect, and that we can learn as much from what went wrong as what went right, and count it as a win no matter what happens. 3, let's explore ourselves before we get started and determine what we really need and want from ritual and spell work. At the end of the day, this is a personal path, even when we choose to take on a well-trodden path, such as initiating ourselves into a specific religion or ceremonial order. It is still deeply personal. It's still a unique experience that we will find along that path. So let's identify what we need, and let's identify what we want out of our magical experiences, and let's make a point of directing our path in that way. Let's inventory ourselves regularly rather than beating ourselves up when something that was previously helpful and meaningful stops working. At those times, it doesn't have to mean anything other than the things that once met our needs no longer do. We've gotten what we can out of them, and now we need something else. That's a sign of personal evolution. That's about growth. It is not a sign of personal failing, which I have seen a lot of spiritual people take it to be. I've seen people talk about falling off the wagon of their spiritual practices or no longer connecting with the same things. And I'm here to tell you that, first of all, it's not your job to be witchy and spiritual if you're not feeling it. It's okay to move away, to move in and out of a practice. And secondly, it's also okay to find that the things that once gave you that great sense of wonder, or that great sense of accomplishment, or that great sense of kind of personal power and personal understanding don't do it anymore. At that time, it's more helpful to ask ourselves what we do need now and what can better serve it, rather than double down on a practice that is leaving us feel disconcerted, disconnected, and faily. With that, I'm going to take a sip of water. I'm also going to greet Savannah, who just slid into the chat. Hey, Savannah, how you doing? I'm late, too. I started a couple minutes late, and also this whole episode is 2 weeks late. So we're all good here. So I'm going to bring us into Witch You Got This. This is a section where I talk about a practical way to apply the ideas I've been talking about in the show. And especially in this episode, I have been getting super theoretical and esoteric with what I'm talking about, rather than making any practical recommendations, which I personally find interesting, but I also know is pedantic and sometimes not particularly helpful. So what I want to do with this section of the podcast is to give you some personal inventories that you can ask yourself at any point of your spiritual path or your path of exploration, to identify what your needs are from ritual and magic at this moment and help you go after those things. By the way, I'm going to give you a preview right now, although I don't think the bonus episodes may come out until a couple days later this week, because it has been a wild month for me. But I want to let you know, $5 and up patrons do get a bonus episode every month, and this month, that's going to be a complete guide episode to building a personalized ritual. So it's going to take some practical guidance to take into account some of these personal preferences and personal sense of what is it that we need, and build a pretty practical ritual around them. This is more about applied magic than quote unquote pure, or sacred magic. This is more about building a practical, pragmatic ritual to change your life. At the same time, it's flexible enough that if the way you wanted to change your life was simply to gain deeper understanding, you could create a ritual for that. So here are the questions I'm going to ask you to ask yourself. And this might be a great kind of thing to listen to or watch this podcast with a pen and paper in hand, or with some time to think and meditate, and being ready and willing to hit the pause and the play button for a little bit, because I want these questions to be useful for you. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and put them on the Patreon after this episode airs as a public post available to everyone as a personal spiritual inventory, so that if you want to, you can just go right there, patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot, and be able to access these questions for episode 20 and kind of read through them and journal at your own pace. Here are the questions. If I let my mind wander, where does my focus go? On a broad level, if when you kind of are in your default mode, maybe you're driving, maybe you're doing a chore like mowing the lawn or doing the laundry, where your mind is not actively engaged and it begins to wander, if your focus goes to, oh my gosh, how do I pay the rent this month? It's pretty clear that you're probably going to want and need like practical spell work as well as practical real life actions, whether it is really about I have a problem paying the rent, or whether it's about I have a lot of anxiety around money and I want to address my anxiety. Like, I'm going to leave room for both of those things. Whereas if when you're wandering, your soul is kind of questing for truth about like, how do I feel more satisfied with my life? What am I really meant to be doing? What is this, what is the purpose of this relationship in my life? Then you might want a more reflective practice, whether it's one that you design yourself or whether you choose to go down a path that others have walked already. Question 2, what is exciting to me about magic right now? What's just like pushing my buttons and making me excited and interested? Because we all know that pull. That's why we're here. That's why we're in a magical community. Question 3, what feels boring and stupid to me in the magical community? I'm not asking you to judge other people and label their practices boring and stupid, but I'm also going to give you space to acknowledge that if certain practices and ideas seem irrelevant and not worth your time, you're allowed to have those opinions, and it's useful for you to acknowledge that so that you can not waste your time on things that aren't going to be useful to you. This is also a question that may get at things that maybe are useful to you that you might have some resistance around, and your own discernment is going to determine that. You are the one who can tell me whether you're not interested in this because you just think it's kind of a waste of time, or you're not interested in this because truthfully you don't want to get into it because it's going to open up a can of worms for you. I'm going to leave that to your discernment. Next question, what are the top 3 things I want in my life right now? This is a big one. Top 1, you might be able to name off the top of your head. I don't know. Depends on who you are and where you are in your life. But top 3 is enough that it's going to probably require maybe some journaling, some thought to help you kind of narrow down and prioritize and think about what matters most to you. And I think it's really worth doing. So this might take a minute. Next question, what do I believe right now? In either a spiritual sense or in a personal life philosophy sense. It's a good time to write down what you perceive to be your values, write down what you perceive to be the way the world works, beliefs around like, good things come to him that goes to fetch it. That's a phrase that keeps recurring in a book I'm reading right now, Salome of the Tenements. I think it's I love it. I love it as a phrase, and I like it a little more than the phrase, God helps those who help themselves, although I think the meaning is about the same. But I like it because it doesn't push you into this kind of, God-believe-y thing if that's not your jam. Good things come to him that go to fetch it. That's an interesting belief. That's something I would write down right now as a belief that I'm considering and interested in my personal life philosophy. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. That's cool. This is about us exploring and identifying those beliefs and reflecting on them. Because the next question is, how do I feel as I reflect on those beliefs? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel disempowered? Do you feel frustrated? Do you feel anger? There are beliefs I have about the way the world works that just straight up make me really angry. And that's a teacher. That's an opportunity for me to identify ways that my needs have not been met, whether these are by real global problems like patriarchy and inflation and, ways that maybe younger generations have been failed by poor planning in terms of environmental use and stuff like that. I can't solve all those things with my spiritual practice, but if any of those things is making me real angry, I can acknowledge that I probably need to address that in my spiritual practice. It's probably important enough to me that I need to either use my spiritual practice to help me get some validation or help me get these unmet needs met, or help me perhaps be an effective agent of change, a foot soldier for justice. So how you feel as you reflect on your beliefs is, I'm just going to say, a teacher. It doesn't have to be something that kicks you into high gear and immediate reactive action. It's a teacher. Next question. Is there anything I would like to believe but feel I can't? Follow-up question. Do I truly want to believe that, i.e., having this belief would improve my life? It feels like a good goal. I think I'd be happier. Or do I feel disillusioned? And the goal is now to seek out a more believable sense of truth. So, for example, you might say to yourself, I want to believe that if I live a righteous life, that only good things will happen to me. And in my opinion, that's not a very functional belief, because then you live a good life and then chaos happens, as chaos does happen, and you blame yourself rather than simply acknowledging, okay, crap happens, and kind of moving on with your life. So in my personal opinion, you may feel differently. That's not a very functional belief. And so when I feel like I'd like to believe that, I don't know if I really do want to believe that. I more feel like, yeah, I wish that were true, but I'm disillusioned by that. And instead, I want to find out a sense of truth that's going to replace that belief in a more positive way. Such as, for example, a more mild thing of like, yeah, I can't control everything in the universe, but there are things I do have control over, and I can choose to be an agent of good in the world, for example. That might be the answer to the belief you wish you could still have, but really you can't. Or maybe there's something you want to believe and it really would be good for you, and other limiting beliefs are holding you back. Maybe you want to believe, I'm worthy of love. Which, by the way, I'm here to tell you, if you're listening to this, my friend, you are worthy of love. I just want to tell you that. I believe that deeply. If you have difficulty believing that, and it feels like something you really do want to believe, maybe that's something you can focus your magical practice around. Maybe that's a helpful goal. Next question. Does very specific, regimented ceremony appeal to me, or does it feel unappealing? Why do I feel that way? Next question. Does taking a more intuitive, kind of whatever approach to magic or spirituality, like a whatever works, take what works for you and leave the rest, does that feel appealing to me, or does it feel unappealing? Why is that? Next question. What is on the magical menu that might move me forward? So, this is kind of where we tie it together. And when I talk about the magical menu, it's like an endless menu, right? It's like going to a diner and there's like the bagel section and there's the omelet section and there's the Greek food section and there's the specials. And if you go to a diner on Long Island, at least this is a diner experience, those menus are sometimes like 10 pages and it can be very overwhelming, and usually I just end up ordering eggs. The magical menu is similarly overwhelming and big. You might already know of a few things that jump out of you on the magical menu from your community or from, things you've read or things you've experienced, but here are some broad topics to consider if you're really at square one. Some broad magical menu item. Doing some type of pathworking or journey that is designed in a regimented, followable way, step by step, to help you achieve greater spiritual or self-awareness. This could be as simple as a guided meditation or as complex as a lengthy multi-part journey or pathworking. The word pathworking is kind of vague, but also describes exactly what I'm talking about, like a laid out set of steps for you to work a journey and learn about yourself along the way. You could say that following the Fool's Journey in Tarot is a type of pathworking. As you interact with all these different archetypes that the Fool interacts with, you're ideally going to learn about yourself along the way. Another item on the menu, following the Pagan Wheel of the Year. If you're into a kind of pagan spirituality, this could be something that is spiritually useful to you. Further, you could step into a magical religion such as Wicca or Thelema, or a practice that is local to you. There are a lot of chapters of kind of witchy covens or groups that follow a specific kind of set of ideas and specific set of rituals that might be meaningful to you. If that's the kind of thing that's helpful, especially if it's helpful for you to practice with others rather than practice as an individual, it might be useful for you to be some or all of your practice. Another item on the magical menu is learning about chaos magic. Now that's a real rabbit hole. If you Google chaos magic, you'll find a lot of things, probably some of them helpful and probably some of them upsetting. But I think that's true of any big spiritual topic. Learning about chaos magic, which in my personal understanding is about using and to some extent hacking our brain's tendencies to have different states, our subconscious and our conscious mind, and utilizing our own psychology in order to create change in our lives. And we can believe that this has a magical component, that something mystical is happening by kind of following these steps, or we can believe that it's all psychological and nevertheless still helps. And either is kind of fair game in chaos magic. Another item on the magical menu, doing divination of any sort, any kind of divination. Ideally not one that is a closed practice to you, like let's try not to be culturally appropriative. Any type of meditative practice. This could be a purely mental meditation. There are several different schools of thoughts around how to meditate. And none of them are wrong. The one that works for you is the one that you should probably do. Or it could have a physical component, like doing a walking meditation or having a yoga practice where you take your body through prescribed movements, and in so doing, both free up your mind and expose your mind to, in some cases stress and in some cases ease and like that sense of, like relaxation, and go where it takes you. A lot of people find that to be a very spiritual practice. Casting a practical spell based on your current desire and magical correspondences. That's more or less what the bonus episode is going to be about. It's me kind of sharing with you my guide of how I create ritual for myself. Or sprinkling one or more of these influences together into your own thing. Are there things missing on this magical menu? Yep, absolutely. You probably have thought of one or two things that I have not listed here, and you probably also are aware of things that I have not listed here. Like have a friend who practices a certain way, follows a specific path, or, showed you some cool folk magic thing on TikTok that's really interesting. All of these things are valid. I'm going to encourage you to be mindful of not being appropriative. If there's a practice that appeals to you, that you see people practicing it who largely are not of the same culture or heritage as you, make sure before you get into it that you're welcome in that space. And if not, then I'm willing to bet, especially with the help of the kind of personal inventory questions, that you can find something else to help you meet the needs, that makes that practice appealing to you in a way that is not appropriative, in a way that is open to you and, will feel magical and meaningful to you without kind of walking on another culture, because we don't need to do that. These are my lengthy thoughts in answer to your question. And originally, Grayson's question, I'm going to come back to it, is, follow the spell book or create the ritual yourself. I think you can probably tell, especially if you just have known me for any length of time through this podcast or personally, that for me, I'm the person who tends to make things up myself. And yet also I find a lot of value in following spell books. I think I've talked a lot about how I follow... I've read several books from Jason Miller, and I find him to be really fascinating and really interesting, and don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but do really look at him with respect as someone who has put a lot of energy and experience into building their wisdom around sorcery. The term he prefers to use is sorcery rather than magic, which I think is useful. I think it's nice to define our own terms. I find it incredibly enlightening to read his work, and I also have integrated some of his work, some of his suggestions, and in some case straight up ritual into my own practice. Do I do them exactly the way he does them? No. And I'll share something that he recommends, which is, why don't you try doing the ritual the exact way the first time, instead of risking tweaking something that will take away the effectiveness of the ritual. Why don't you try it the first time the way it's meant and see how that goes? And I'm going to say that sometimes I do it in practice and sometimes I don't. I see the value. You know what I mean? In the same way I see the value of following the science experiment, just the same way someone else already did, so that you can ground yourself in an understanding. And then, choose to do it that way in the future, or choose to tweak it to further reach your goals. I also am going to just straight up acknowledge to you that I have never in my life followed a ritual 100% by the book. I've done it close. And I have certainly written down a ritual and made one or two tweaks to make it feel really comfortable to me and in line with my own beliefs and feelings. And then followed that by the book multiple times. But I'm definitely the person who's more, I don't know if I'm on the side of making it up yourself. I'm on the side of mindfully choosing your own adventure. And that's kind of what I guess I am a proponent of in this podcast. But I want to encourage you to do it your way, and that includes if your way is by the book. You know, if your way is I'm going to follow the spell book and I'm going to learn exactly what I can from those who have gone before me, well, that's really valuable. And probably I am missing out on some experiences that you are getting by doing that, you know? So I'm here for it. So I have not in my life yet hugged a tree and done the chicken dance and won $1 million. But I got to tell you, Grayson, like, I'm willing to give it a go. Like, you put it out there. And I'm like, can't hurt. I'd really like $1 million. And I do resonate with this concept of having to pick a system and stick with it long enough to get good at it, or at least to gain some understanding of it. I think that I'm gonna like specifically think about how I feel about belief as a tool and how I feel that like different things can achieve the same result. And picking one system and sticking with it can at least give you a framework for that, can at least show you, you know, kind of the workings in a way that just reading about them or being like, yeah, okay, XYZ, you know, XYZ leads to ABC might intellectually make sense to you, but might not really like stick it into your brain in a level that is meaningful and able for something that you can then work with again and again in the future. So you're both right, guys. That is me. I am that person. I am that person who finds value in every side of the philosophy. And perhaps in so doing, I dilute the philosophy for those who are really purists on one side or the other. And if so, I'm sorry, y'all. That's just who I am. My friend Judith Zweiman explained to me how it's all in my chart and I'm a bridge between different types of people and just never feel understood for myself. But that's my practice. I encourage you to do your practice your way instead of my way, unless you like my way, in which case, hey, you're invited to the club. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to close out the episode as always with a song. But first, I want to thank you for spending time with me today. And I want to let you know how you can spend more time with me if you really want to in a non-creepy friendly way. If you like this podcast, first of all, it would mean a lot to me if you would rate it and review it wherever you listen to the podcast. This really helps podcasters, especially if you leave a review or if you take a moment to share it with someone that you think might enjoy it. This is how podcasts grow, and it's really, really meaningful to those of us who are creators. So I'd be very grateful for any of that. If you want to support this podcast financially and unlock exclusive benefits along the way, you can do so at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot for $1 a month or more. Patrons get access to things like extra content, personalized tarot pulls, a witchy Discord community, and more. If you have a question, an idea, a suggestion, if you want to tell me I'm a goofball, you can email me anytime at sassafrastarot@gmail.com, and you can follow me on social media at Sassafras Tarot, pretty much everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. If you'd like to order a reading, I'm not really pushing my readings right now because I tend to be crazy busy in the summer, but my Etsy shop is still open, and you can do so at etsy.com/shop/Sassafras Tarot. Finally, I know I picked two words that are very difficult for most people to spell: SassafrasTarot. Type those letters in, and you'll find me. I'm going to take you out with a song. This is a song that is not yet released, and it is kind of about, dare I say it, my spiritual experience. It's been really interesting for me as someone who, as you can probably tell if you've listened to this episode, can be very pedantic and really, really wants to get at the very specific truth, very specifically describe things in the correct way. It's important to me. That's the style of communication that, for better or worse, comes naturally to me. And I have written a few songs that really take a departure from that, that really are more about me just trying to describe my feelings and describe my spiritual experiences in a way that actually gets them across. In the same way that when you describe a dream to somebody that you just had, and if you just describe the plot of the dream, your person that you're talking to isn't always going to understand how and why it moved you so deeply, how and why it either terrified you or made you feel suffused with like love for humanity or made you feel some other big deep emotion. And like, to me, that's where art steps in, right? That's where creativity and being a little more intuitive in our expression and a little less literal in our expression can begin to convey those things in a way that specific words with definitions can't always. And that's me giving you a really specific wordy definition of why I wrote this song about intuitively describing my spiritual experience. This is who I am, y'all. This is a song called Saltwater, and it really just kind of tries to touch on the feelings I've experienced going down this spiritual path in the last few years. And I hope it resonates with you. It's also not released anywhere. So this is my song. It is copyright Rorie Kelly 2020. But you're not going to be able to find it anywhere except for this podcast at the moment. So I really hope you enjoy it. Can you sense it? The fire is burning bright in me. A spell I never cast, cold blue, aching glass, and the ocean is calling me. Like a ghost on a full moon at midnight, all the circumstances line up. Did the timelines cross? Was it just a dream? Like a play that I haven't the guts to write, like a stage but the stakes are real tonight, to see perchance to travel in a dream. Can you sense it? The fire is burning bright in me. A spell I never cast, cold blue, aching glass, and the ocean is calling me. And the salt water pool is all I feel. Like a flashlight under the covers, like the salty pull of the water. Like a child in the night, what do you believe? Like a shadow hint of destiny, like a quest but you never quite see what it is before you come out of a dream. Ooh, yeah. Like a locket full of promise, like the crossroads but out of focus, like a shedding skin, like a mystery, like a shadow hint of destiny, like a quest but you never quite see what it is before you come out of a dream. And can you sense it? The fire that's burning bright in me. A spell I never cast, cold blue, aching glass, and the ocean is calling me. And the salt water pool is all I feel. And the salt water pool is all I feel. And the salt water pool is all I feel. Ooh, yeah. And the salt water pool is all I feel. Thank you so much. If you enjoy my music, please search for me wherever you listen to music. You can search for Rorie Kelly, RorieKelly, on your favorite music listening place like Spotify or Apple Music or Bandcamp. You can also visit my website, roriekelly.com, or follow me on Twitch, where I live stream at least twice a week, often more, twitch.tv/Rorie Kelly. And if you type my name into your favorite social media site, you will probably find me there too. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I wish you luck. I wish you joy on your path. I wish you an evolving path that fills you with both insight and confusion, because that's how growth works. Farewell, my dears. Have a wonderful